in. So I wanted to mention a couple of things before we get into this example. And actually, it's sort of two questions that we get regularly about universal design for learning that have come up already during the break, and I realized I should just go ahead and address them because they may be questions that many of you have. Actually, three questions. So one is, do you need technology to be able to do universal design for learning or apply UDL in your practice? And given that I know many of you, or few of you raised your hand that you sort of use computers and technology regularly in your classroom, you may be thinking, okay, so this whole example that I'm going to show is irrelevant. I hope that's not the case, and we absolutely say you do not need technology, but technology makes things a lot easier. So when you're thinking about flexibility and options, being able to take text and make it different sizes and make it read aloud and make it turn into Braille and make it turn into Spanish and right, that's all much, much easier when you have technology, which is why we use technology quite a lot because of all the affordances it provides. But we do quite a lot of teacher workshops that don't use technology at all. And it's basically the same process. It just requires a little bit more creativity, which educators have in abundance. So it goes through basically the same process of thinking about the learning goal, making sure that it doesn't unintentionally include the means of displaying that, demonstrating knowledge or understanding of that goal. And then working through, okay, how am I going to assess that? And how can I include options for that assessment? And as we talked about, that could be everything from drawing or writing, but also dancing or creating a song or making a skit or explaining it to you or to a peer. There's all sorts of different options that don't actually have anything to do with technology that can be employed. Similarly with materials, as I said, technology makes it a lot easier. But you could, depending on so physics, you could do a lot of this without the technology by providing the book as one option, but also providing demonstrations, having students come up with different ways of explaining it to each other, right? If you have access to video, even if you don't have sort of computers and things, being able to show videos, even drawings or images will help. The idea is to think about where can we get options, even if we don't have the technology that sort of automatically makes the options available. Okay, so I'm going to show this example, Book Builder, which is very clearly technology, but it's meant to sort of show how we've put these principles into practice, and demonstrating it with technology is a little bit easier to do. Second question is cost, and whether all of this is expensive, whether with technology or even without, because the idea of having to provide lots of options for any given lesson sounds really expensive. And the way we usually sort of talk about this is, well, it may be in some cases that you have to get more materials, right? And it may be that you want to start small and work on sort of one lesson or one set of lessons or one unit at a time, and year by year you sort of accumulate more options and that kind of thing. But on the other hand, if this is making it so that more students are able to be successful in your general classroom and thus are not as in need of specialized instruction, that specialized instruction is very expensive. Right? And it's not to say that, clearly we're not sort of curing all disabling conditions, right? If a student needs targeted instruction in reading because they're dyslexic, they still need that. But being able to have that student succeed in social studies class because they're able to now access the reading that otherwise they wouldn't have gained any learning from seems in many ways a more cost-effective approach. So it certainly takes a lot of time. It's definitely not easier, and it does take some money. But overall, and from districts, we've had large districts. New York City actually is working on a big UDL initiative right now. And they've concluded that for them, it's actually, in the long run, more cost effective. And then the third question is about spoon feeding. So if we're making it so that it reads aloud and it tells you the definition and it does all these things, are we basically taking out all the challenge and making things easy, right? And emphatically, we are not. But what we're trying to do is make it so that the hard stuff is what everybody is focusing on. And the other stuff that we don't care much about in this particular context is taken care of. So we think a lot about where do the scaffolds go in any particular case. And we want that challenge, in part because we've done some initial research now that demonstrates that the challenge is actually, when you think about the multiple means of engagement, challenge is hugely engaging, right? If everything's easy, it's actually not very engaging at all. So trying to get at that right level of challenge is what we work a lot about. So we talk about balancing demands and resources, okay? So for any individual kid, the demands of a task could be overwhelming, right? The demands of making sense of a history textbook might be overwhelming, such that the engagement is very low and the learning also is going to be very low. So what resources can we provide so that the demands and the resources are perceived to be more in balance? And that's going to be much more motivating and a much more rewarding experience. So we actually try in many ways to raise the level of challenge for a lot of kids. So for instance, when we work with kids with intellectual disabilities, for a long time there was an assumption that reading was sort of, for many students, out of the realm of possibility, right? We want to raise the challenge there to say, no, actually, we're going to have expectations that these kids are going to read. And let's provide the background knowledge or whatever other supports are needed to raise the level of challenge and the level of expectation, to put it, actually higher than it would have been otherwise. Questions or comments about those? Okay. Feel free to interrupt. So I want to show Book Builder. And actually, I should just set the stage a little bit to say that this is one of our oldest technologies. It's definitely not as souped up as the physics one that I showed earlier, but it's one that's free, and it's in Spanish, or it's available in Spanish, and it's remarkably easy to use, such that even elementary school kids can make their own books, right? Which the other ones require a little bit more technical expertise. So Book Builder is sort of lower in sophistication, but that comes with some benefits. And as I said, this section of slides is available on the CD and in Spanish, so don't feel like you have to get everything written down. Okay. So this is CAST Book Builder. And just to tell the story, this is one of the first projects done with students with intellectual disabilities to tackle this challenge of, wait, these students should be taught to read. And not just decoding, but actually comprehension. So in working with practitioners, Book Builder was born as a way to provide the supports that would work for this population of students. So the way Book Builder works, and it's just bookbuilder.cast.org, is you come and you log in, and I've already logged in, so there's me. And then there are model books. I should mention there are no model books currently in Spanish. If you create a really nice book, please send it to us so that we can make it a model book. But there are public library books. That's where we're going to go. And then, so there's the ability to read books. So you can read things that are already created and shared. And there's, 40,000, I think. You can create books and share them, or your kids can create them and share them. And then you can learn here more about UDL and more about how to author and use different kinds of media and things like that. There's all sorts of background information here. And just while I'm on the home page, I'll just show that there's also always a spotlight book, and there's the ability to go to an online forum where you can talk with others who are using Book Builder, and of course there's a way to send feedback, which we love to get. So first I'm going to sort of focus on what it's like to read a book, and then we'll get a little bit more into how to create. So when you go to the public library, there's all sorts of different ways to filter. I should say Terry's tips up here. Terry, and actually I've got to ask people at CAST, I have no idea why she's called Terry, but anyway, she's this giraffe who gives tips to the teacher about either how to create the book or why, for the model books, why the book was created in a certain way. It sort of explains the thinking for the teacher. But Terry doesn't appear on books that are for kids. So you can search through all sorts of different ways, including language. And these are all the different languages that are supported: English, Spanish, Portuguese, French, German, Italian, Korean, Latin, and other. Some are more supported than others, Spanish in particular. So I am going to search by my favorites, which I already did a search for Spanish, and then I favorited a couple just to show. And I'm just going to hit read. Oh, popped up on this screen. Hold on. And this is what a book builder book would look like. So again, you may recognize this. This makes it read aloud, translates it into Spanish. Oh, here, we'll do this. Hold on, turning up my volume.
A fuego lento. Te invito a conocer nuestra deliciosa gastronomía colombiana.
What's that? It's from Spain, yes. I was told to be aware that it's from Spain. Can somebody translate for me? Okay, so they're inviting us to know the delicious food. It's going to be like a cookbook. You have the ability to create little coaches.
Hola, soy tu ayudante de cocina. Juntos prepararemos exquisitos platos típicos de Colombia, así que no dudes en consultarme.
And then off she goes. So the author has the ability to create little coaches, to put in images, to put in text, all these things. And then you go through, she or he, I guess I don't know, has a table of contents with the different recipes that you could learn in this book. And then it goes through the different recipes. And they've put in an audio. Which doesn't seem to be playing. I'm not sure what happened there, but usually they often put in audio clips that are either reading it aloud, which you don't actually need to do because the reader can make it read aloud, or giving some kind of context or some kind of explanation. It's kind of nice because it's in your own voice, or you may have a kid do the recording and it's in a kid's voice, and there's the ability to put all these things in. So again, so remember, we're thinking about multiple means of representation. So here there's an attempt to provide, text and audio. There's images. You could maybe imagine doing images that actually showed 3 of these and 3 of these and 4 of these to make it a little bit more representative. And then there's a coach. I don't know what she says this time.
El ajiaco es un plato muy antiguo en Latinoamérica. En varios países lo cocinan, pero su receta ha ido cambiando a través del tiempo. Sin embargo, es una de las recetas tradicionales y representativas de la ciudad de Bogotá.
Okay, so it goes through. So you can see that the author here has tried to move beyond a traditional cookbook, right? This has got a lot more in it than a traditional cookbook would. So they're trying to take advantage of the technology to think about the variability in learners for the different recipes and things. And then I'll just show another one that's a little bit more kid-based.
Hola, me llamo Bob y tengo la misión de decodificar este libro o cuaderno que se titula Con unos sentidos, las emociones.
So here, the author has chosen to use 2 different coaches. You can use up to 3. And
Hola, mi nombre es Emma y me gusta mucho ver lo que dibujas o escribes y también oír lo que quieres contar.
And often people use multiple coaches because they want to put different levels. So one will be sort of the basic level of coach up to sort of more sophisticated or advanced coaches. Or sometimes they'll play kind of different roles. One will give one perspective and another will give another perspective. But the coaches can be used pretty flexibly. So here somebody has made a nice book with different images in it, different coaches. Asking about the bear's feelings. So this is a book all about emotion. And then just one more that I wanted to just show because it has something a little different. So here, they've chosen to put in a picture for a coach so that it's a kid talking to the other kids. And then they've also chosen to use the opportunity to ask questions. So kids can respond. Unfortunately, as opposed to the one that I showed earlier, the physics, here you could only respond by typing. As I said, this is an older tool that doesn't have all the bells and whistles, but they can type in responses so that it's a little bit more interactive, and it goes through to different pages. So I guess what I just want to highlight is that these are individuals who don't have any particular technical expertise, but recognize that they wanted to convey something or tell a story or something like that, and that the traditional material that they had available was limited for certain students, and that they felt that they could better present it and have multiple sort of means of representing the information using Book Builder. So again, they use multiple means of representation. So there's text, there's images, there's audio. Multiple means of action and expression. Not as many as we would like, but there is the opportunity to put in answers to questions. And then multiple means of engagement, where the author can think about different ways that they might engage students with the material, whether it's through different images or different levels of scaffolding or things like that. And the way that we always recommend, just like, now I feel like a broken record, but just like everything for Book Builder is what's the goal of this lesson or project, and what options can I offer that will not interfere with the goal. And I'm not going to move through each of these individually. We're not actually going to create a book, but I did want to just highlight that there is the opportunity to do so and that it is all free. So all you do is you open an account, You go to create and edit your books. And again, these slides are on the CD. You start a new book, put in information. It's very important that you select Spanish as your language, partly because it makes it searchable, but also because it makes the text-to-speech read it in Spanish. So both. So the question was, is it mainly used for teachers, or do teachers use it as an assignment? And we've had both. So it was designed for teachers, and unexpectedly, they started having their kids use it. So we have actually, and I didn't show them because they're not in Spanish, but if you browse through the public library, there are some fabulous storybooks where the kids have drawn pictures, put it up, and put their words with it, and then they read it aloud. You know, they make a recording, and it's really a wonderful vehicle for that kind of thing. And then we've also actually had up to college students who have used this as a way to demonstrate understanding, or actually as a sort of study opportunity to try to explain a concept in multiple ways that other learners could understand, which turns out to be a really kind of neat assignment. So it's used both ways. And then you create your coaches, you pick your layout, you add whatever you would like to add. You can add images, audio, coaches. It is free, completely free. Add student response areas. You can add a glossary. I didn't show any examples of that, but you can make it so that it underlines certain words. When the kid clicks on it, it gets to whatever definition you provide. Including, you can put text and images and audio in the glossary. And then you finish your book, you save it, and you can decide if you want to either just share it with individuals, so you can share it with a small group, or you can publish it to the library. If you do go off and make a book, or have your students make a book, I would love it if you sent me an email so that we could sort of see where the number of books in other languages is growing quite rapidly, and it's helpful for us to get a sense of how did folks hear about it, and where did this book come from, and that kind of thing. So it would be wonderful if you could send me a little note. And then you can also access shared books. So we have teachers who do this, for instance, for independent reading time, like silent reading time during their class. They might make Book Builder books one of the options so that kids could go on and access it that way, including books in the public library. Okay, so any questions before I get into sort of concluding thoughts about how we might collaborate and things, and then we'll have plenty of time for discussion.
A number of times you mentioned that it's the technology, this is like one of the first ones, and it's a little bit older.
Yeah.
You said that so many times. Are there ideas for revamping it? That's my question.
We would love to if we get funding. I should mention that there is another free version that's of a product that's got more features than this, called UDL Studio. I didn't show it because it doesn't have Spanish. But it's also free, UDL Studio, and if you go to udlstudio.cas.org, it's similar in that you can create things without any particular technical knowledge or server or anything like that. And it's the same idea. You create books, share them, all of that kind of thing. So, yes. But, you know, there's a benefit to keeping this simple, which is nice. And people have created many books and love them and would be sad if we took them down. So,
Thank you.
thank you. Other questions or thoughts? Okay. So, one of the sort of pieces that Mark emphasized in getting the conference organized was the opportunity for folks to be involved in ongoing research efforts, and I understand that there's an opportunity for some of you who choose to present at the next year's conference. We would love to be involved. We currently have some work going on in Chile, in Santiago, and then also some in Spain and various places abroad. But we really want to grow that work. We're very interested in that. And so it would be wonderful if you're interested and you think that doing something around UDL or using some of these tools, which certainly is not a requirement, but or, for instance, if you'd like to try out some of our new prototypes that we're just doing research on, that would be a wonderful opportunity for us to get a sort of different cultural perspective, that kind of thing. But also just in terms of the framework of UDL, as I said, we recognize that, and I was talking at the break with some folks who were talking about the diversity in terms of cultures in their classrooms. And that's something that we don't consider well enough in our current version of the framework and the guidelines. So for instance, nowhere in the guidelines do you see anything that refers to, multiple means to sort of account for cultural differences, mostly because we don't quite know what that means or what that might look like. And we'd love to do some research that helps us to understand more fully what does it mean to have different cultural groups in the classroom, and how does learning perhaps vary along that kind of a dimension. So I just sort of wanted to highlight again that we do sort of basic kinds of research. Most of that right now is around the role of emotions and stress, stigma, stereotype, threat, sort of in the engagement realm, partly because that's sort of where we know the least, so we're really focusing a lot on that. But again, that would be a great place where, if we could think about, for instance, how does stigma work for individuals with disabilities in your context? I don't know. I don't know if it does. I don't know if there is sort of a stigma or stereotype associated with having different kinds of disabilities. But I would love to talk about that kind of thing. And then we do all this development and innovation where we're creating technology. And again, it would be great to have different places to pilot. So opportunities for collaboration. So research in a cross-cultural context. I don't know if you all are familiar with the Most People Are Not Weird article. So there's this great article in Nature in 2010 that's basically appropriately scolding folks like me to say that most of the research that we base conclusions on is drawn from weird populations, or weird samples. Weird meaning Western, educated, industrialized, democratic, yes, right? So all of these conclusions are based basically on research done with college undergraduates in the United States, right? That is not representative of the diversity in the world, right? And we absolutely recognize that, so we would love to work together to move beyond that. But then in your own context, we have folks doing professional development experiences in their own schools, where we're able to help provide slides or materials or ideas, or talk through thoughts about what you might like to do. And we're happy to provide support with that. And also helping us to understand how you're translating these ideas into your own context helps us to refine things and make things better. So I would love to be in a dialogue if something resonated today and you want to bring it back to your own school, to think about how to do that. And then being sort of action researchers. So our typical sort of approach to things is that we focus on a problem of practice. So like Book Builder came out of this population of students with intellectual disabilities, but you likely have problems of practice that that we haven't thought about, that we would love to sort of engage with, to say, okay, let's sort of work together as thought partners, or actually create something that addresses a specific problem that you have in your school or in your classroom. What questions might you want to tackle, and what would help you support what would help support you in that kind of effort. And then I also just wanted to mention, oh, the link's hard to see, I apologize, but there is a nascent or sort of budding discussion forum happening on our discussion page, which is called UDL Connect. This is on the CD too, of Spanish-speaking educators who are trying to apply universal design for learning in their contexts. So please feel welcome to join the conversation there. And I think that's, so Helen's gonna come up. Helen Abadzi is our facilitator. She's gonna come up and join. Thank you.
Very brief facilitation because Samantha is so comprehensive and you're so comprehensive in everything, and we have one person here. I'm Helen Abadzi. I'm an educational psychologist from the World Bank. Trabajo en el Banco Mundial en Washington. Entonces soy una persona que me interesa siempre hacer cómo podemos aplicar todo esto particularmente para los países más pobres, particularly for the poorest countries. So I have some questions for Samantha.
Yeah.
How much does it cost to do any of these things? How long does it take to do any of these things? What specialty, how much knowledge do the people have to do?
Okay, so great question. So the cost I talked a little bit about after the break, but the cost to provide many options of things can be challenging. And as I said, we suggest going lesson by lesson and thinking through how can you build up your array of options. There are many freely available tools if technology is an opportunity, an option for you. And certainly I can provide lots of suggestions of free online tools. If you don't have access to technology, I think this is where the creativity comes in. And what we've found actually is that a lot of teachers, if they're not using technology, come up with certain approaches that they're able to create for a variety of lessons. So that might be they always have, or they try to always have, images included with the text. And bit by bit, they're able to sort of collect enough images, or they're always trying to have a video, or this sort of thing. So cost can be a challenge, primarily if technology is not available. Time, I think, is the much bigger barrier, actually, to cost. It takes a long time. And again, when we work on an ongoing way with teachers, we usually focus on a specific unit or a specific set of lessons, and each year try to work up that unit. And then also what ends up happening is that teachers can collaborate in a given school. So, okay, you work on the water cycle unit and you work on the, carbon cycle unit. And between us, we'll get enough options going that we make some headway. So time is an effort. Expertise. So expertise is what we've tried to do is to make a lot of the principles available to all educators without particular background knowledge, trying to be UDL ourselves, right? But what we found is that collaborating with specialists who have particular areas of expertise, so for instance, if you have students who are low vision in your school, and you have a specialist who knows that kind of population well, accessing that expertise ends up helping you to think through what kinds of options to provide, because it widens the spectrum of students that you're considering. So we often will suggest that folks work with individuals with particular expertise, mostly because it helps you to sort of broaden from the sort of average population that most folks are most comfortable and have the most knowledge about.
Thank you. Do you have some data? For example, it was Codiger, who was showing how you can actually cut down about 25% of the time with the right situation.
Yes.
Do you have something to show us?
Yes. So I don't have data that I can display, but for instance, the physics curriculum that I showed, which obviously took quite a lot of time to put together, but
Years, months?
that one, we already had the platform, so months. I would say 3 months, 4 months. For a unit, so for like 10 weeks maybe of instruction. But the teacher who, well, there's been different teachers using it, but the one teacher who did our main pilot study with, I don't know, a couple hundred kids in a very under-resourced, difficult, challenging, not World Bank challenging, but Boston challenging situation. He reported that students moved through the material much more quickly, and actually, I mean, we were there and saw that they did. So what used to take him, for instance, a week to cover a very challenging concept took more like 3 days, because students could access it at their own pace, could move through at their own pace. So some students who could move through quickly were able to do that. Other students for whom it was more challenging were able to go back and listen to it again, either in a study hall kind of thing or at home, and they could rewatch the videos and things like that. So they just were able to grasp the material much more quickly. But then also, we were quite happy to find that their performance on the state standardized test, the items that had to do particularly with what we covered, was something like 40% better scores than in previous years with the same teacher. Just because students, had this much richer opportunity. They also loved it. I mean, they started talking about physics as their favorite class. Students who, were really struggling readers and things. So.
Oh, it's really neat how we see that if you activate the right places in the brain with the right sequence, stuff happens. Would you like to summarize the principles? Again,
Yes.
the 3 principles, and then you have 9 implications. See if you can make kind of something that people will remember better.
Yes. Okay, so 3 principles. So remember, we're trying to think about how to design instruction to meet the widest array of learners. So can we design instruction according to the principles of providing multiple means of representation? So multiple ways for students to take in and make meaning from information. Multiple means of action and expression. So how do students interact with the materials and the learning, and how do they express what they know? And multiple means of engagement. So how can students who have different levels of interest, different levels of motivation, different backgrounds, engage with the same material? How can we provide different hooks, different opportunities for them to be engaged?
Another question. We would like very much, when we deal with the poorest of the poor,
Yeah.
and also the low-performing students who are, for whatever reason, they can be middle class. A big issue is that they may not become automatic in those basic skills. Reading fluency to where you see words and they just fly out at you. Mental math, instant math. Fluent and not terribly having to think about comparisons and estimations.
Mm-hmm.
How does does your software do that? Because I hear a lot of higher order processing.
Yeah.
I don't see a whole lot of
I've got to
low-level
say we are
skills.
mostly higher order processing. And I think that that's in part because most of our learning goals in schools beyond the lowest levels in elementary school are around higher order things, and we see the lower level as potential barriers to those higher level. But I think it's a great way for us to think through how would we address those sort of lower level things that need to become automatic. And actually, we have a project going on right now that gets closer to this. So we're working with Scholastic, big publishing company, right, for profit. And we're working with them on a project that focuses on their most popular remedial reading program called Read 180. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And this is works on a lot of the sort of phonological awareness, automaticity, fluency, things that we don't usually pay that much attention to, right? And it's been really interesting to think with them about, okay, so for instance, they have a fluency activity where students are presented a text and they need to read it into a microphone, and it gets, sort of recorded and scored and that sort of thing, and timed and all this. And so what we've thought about is, okay, how can we provide options in there that keep the fluency as the main target, but for instance, can students choose what text to read? Which at least gives a little bit of choice and autonomy and a little bit of engagement. And that's something that you could do offline too, right? It doesn't require the screen at all. But can we put choice in there? Can we put choice in terms of their goal? How quickly do they want to be able to read it? And it's actually been amazing, right? Because I don't know what people would predict, but there maybe would be an assumption that students would choose to give themselves a long time to read it, right? Like, I'm going to go sort of slowly because I know this isn't a strength for me, but actually students really want to go, quickly. And when you give them that choice to set their own goal, it's highly motivating, and it also keeps them engaged in something that otherwise gets pretty deathly boring pretty quickly. So choosing the text, choosing a goal, the other thing we've been focused a lot on is feedback. What kind of feedback should we be providing? Beyond sort of you got it right or you got it wrong, but things that help focus them on strategic. So what did you choose, what options did you have? What did you choose to use? That kind of thing. Or, today you chose, we haven't actually done this, but, today you chose to read about zombies, and you've chosen that 4 times in the last 2 weeks. That kind of information provides them a way to say, and maybe they'll continue, and we don't really care. Maybe they'll continue to read about zombies, but at least it gives them a little bit of information to make more strategic decisions and a little bit of empowerment around that. And then we've also been working a lot on how to give feedback around motivation and engagement. So how can we help students monitor where they are? So it's all sort of around that, but it's not actually about the fluency or automaticity themselves.
Of course, in higher income countries and higher grades, that isn't supposed to be a problem. Right. The thing is, people skip that and don't realize when it is a problem. And in the world that I circulate in, which is mainly West Africa, it's a huge problem. So that comes first and foremost. I wanted to make one slight comment. You said the weird research. That's a bit overdone, because the information processing base is defined Homo sapiens. I mean, we all processing, some of us are better in something and some of us are worse in something else, but the steps of encoding, of consolidating, of retrieving, of forgetting, this stuff, even though it's been done with zillions of US undergraduates, we don't have a reason to think that the Chinese do it differently. Quite the opposite. You get the research of children passing across countries, such as when you know that something that's hidden has not disappeared, or you exercise executive control. So there are a few perceptual issues, there are decision making, and some of these such issues that people say, oh, this is culturally loaded. Yes, but a whole lot of stuff is not. I mean, we're all Homo sapiens, and in order to teach everyone, it is wise to focus on what is reasonable in terms of commonalities rather than the differences. Otherwise, we drive the teachers crazy. I mean, we all have working memory and it's all limited. How many students' performance can you keep in your working memory at one moment? You tell me. How many will cause cognitive overload? I think we overdo a little bit the individuality stuff.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think what we're particularly conscious of is that because CAST comes out of a history of working with students with disabilities, we're very fluent in that aspect of variability, right? So We have a lot of folks who are very experienced working with kids with dyslexia or kids with physical disabilities or sensory disabilities or all of that kind of thing. And so I feel like we're very comfortable with, okay, let's think, how would you design if you have all of these kids in your class? And the cultural piece is the piece that we're a little less fluent in.
Yeah, but my
But they
personal
may be-
position is we shouldn't be. I mean, culture is also frequencies of events. So
It's true.
Thank
you. Oh, yes.
Bueno, yo quiero hacer una consulta. Realmente yo trabajo con niños que tienen, que ya saben leer en los primeros años escolares, pero obviamente hemos conseguido que lean, que tengan fluidez, pero hay un gran inconveniente y no sé si es que les ha ocurrido, que los niños no entienden o no se quedan con las ideas en lo que es lectura comprensiva. Ellos no interiorizan el mensaje del cuento, los personajes, cuáles son sus características. Entonces yo quisiera saber si usted conoce algún software, alguna herramienta que nos pueda ayudar a mejorar estas habilidades en los niños o a qué procesos debemos retroceder para poderles ayudar a mejorar en este sentido de la lectura comprensiva.
So that's a great question. So, and you're talking about what age? 7 to 8. Okay. So, well, I mean, a few different ideas come to mind. So, have you done things like concept maps, or do you know that term? Things where you're taking what's textual. So basically, I think if I'm understanding, you're saying that they can read fluently, but keeping all of the pieces, putting them all together, becomes a challenge, right?
And what you mentioned about characters and you mentioned about little details from the book.
Yeah.
I think you can get more out of the book if there's a connection to their lives. Is there a connection to something that they're living? So
Yeah.
it's more changing what we want to get out of reading,
Right.
basically, and that's something that we have to change in the way we were taught. I mean, and we're teaching our students. So that's basically, that will be my first tool for you. It will be change the way you ask questions. Make sure that this is relevant for them, and then they will get the comprehension out of the book.
Right.
That's
Great. Thank you. Do others have other ideas?
I would like to share also an experience of the place I work at. As you mentioned, starting from what is meaningful for the children is a really important point. For example, I remember I was listening to my colleagues that teach first and second graders. They were planning a lesson on how to teach the syllables blah, 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 blah. So they said, okay, let's start for something that is meaningful and real for the children. So they planned a workshop where the first part was to inviting them to close their eyes. And they brought bananas to the classroom. And they gave bananas to the children, and the teacher asked, okay, please smell what you have in your hands, touch it, feel it. And then, what do you think this is? Oh, okay, it's probably, I don't know, it's soft, it's smooth. It's a banana. Okay, so we'll observe your banana. And they started to describe the banana, and they ended speaking about banana plantations and how rich people make children work there. I mean, they were second graders, and they were talking about it. But they were so engaged in that afterwards they started to describe their bananas. And they started to describe them with the ideas they were having in their minds. And afterwards they created a text, a collective text. And then afterwards the story about the banana was introduced. So it was meaningful for them. And they could understand and read and understand because there was a prior work that was meaningful to them. So.
Thank you.
Can I ask something? Puedo yo preguntarles cuál fue el propósito de esa clase. Fue enseñar babe bibobu, no hablar de bananas, no? I mean, this is something that Samantha has been saying is, what is the goal of something? And very often when you get in this active learning stuff, they may go very far away from the goal. You wanted the children to actually become automatic readers in ba, be, bi, okay? If you spend your entire time smelling bananas, that doesn't have much to do with ba and bu. So, blue.
When they wanted to describe, they had to use el plátano es rico, and they started to learn the syllables, but from a meaningful thing to them.
Who says, this is challenging, I'm going to challenge you people. Who says that this was meaningful? What evidence do we have that this indeed was meaningful? I mean, do all this work fine. Did that make them read blah and blee any faster? Yeah. What evidence do you have, seriously?
Well, we videotaped that class, and afterwards, since the discussion about the banana plantations came from one of the children, because they say, oh, I know, because they were speaking about where bananas grow in the coast and how. So one child said, okay, and this happened like this. And say, plátanos son así, y los niños trabajan ahí para cosechar los plátanos. Entonces empezaron a hablar de sus propias vivencias, de lo que ellos habían escuchado de los plátanos, y después para poder hablar y describir en un texto colectivo tenían que practicar esas sílabas y leerlas.
Miren lo que pasa. Yes, this is the issue that, actually, by the way, tomorrow, advertisement, I will be discussing all that and constructivismo and how to get efficient learning at 9:30, I believe, is my thing, Saturday. What Samantha was saying here was, what are the goals? Depending on the goals, something may be very far or very near. All of this active learning can take you to the banana plantations, but the whole point was to finally become an automatic reader in these patterns. And yes, Samantha says the patterns and the recognition of this stuff is quite important. So if the goal were to learn and speak and feel and you do all of this multisensory stuff, then your bananas are fine. If it's to learn how to identify blah, blah, blah within like a few milliseconds, that's not it necessarily. Which is one of the dictums that say, if you want to do active learning, the question is, what are the students thinking during these active learning things? So the reason why this matters so much is that finally students are falling behind, and I have watched many such cases, particularly in Latin America. They do such enriched stuff that ends up being very far from the destrezas básicas, from basic skills. So you end up with a situation like, oh, they don't understand. Well, they're really not reading fast enough. There maybe, by the way, people do have short, memoria de corto plazo es demasiado corta, pero esto sucede a un 3% de la población según una investigación. That happens maybe 30% of the population. I also have a 10% estimate from the UK. Most of the time, they're not reading fast enough. So they can talk about bananas till doomsday, but we need them first to get fast and automatic in cálculo mental, in fluency, in order then to be able to read all of these screens and then to do much more complex stuff on bananas and what have you. And that may be that direct instruction is the way to go and speed and shorten this stuff up so that they can do then all that you want. So these are things that for you and for your classes matter. And again, I very much want to discuss this because in Latin America, we end up with this huge inequality. The rich ones will do this job right, but then someone watches them at home, whereas the poor ones only get school time, no one particularly to care for them, and they barely manage. And then their instructional time may be spent not very wisely. But for this kind of a thing, you get us to bring you back to the fact that you need to combine all of these three principles. How do we do them with technology, without technology, is what's needed.
Thank you. Yep. So let me, and I guess we're getting close to the end, but I wanted to just mention something about the idea of connecting to your life and being engaged and all of this. And really, I just kind of wanted to highlight a case of a research project that we're currently working on, because I think it's really kind of an interesting case example. So we're working with the Boston Museum of Science, which is a wonderful science museum, very well known, has all sorts of hands-on, very interactive, really wonderful exhibits. And they approached us because they have this very sort of interesting challenge that kids come to the Science Museum, often on field trips, with their schools, and are extremely excited. Like, crazy excited, sort of running around, so excited. Whereas, of course, in science classrooms, you're often dealing with the opposite problem, right? And we were kind of like, well, this is great, you're going to have this wonderful opportunity because kids are really excited to engage in science and to be at the museum. But they were finding that actually very little learning was going on, right? Because this high positive affect, very engaged sort of motivational state was not being harnessed in any way by the exhibits and the sort of activities, which were very open and free and, sort of, you could go through them however you want. And they kind of didn't know what to do about this because they felt like we should be able to harness this positive energy and excitement to great learning, and we haven't yet. So right now we're actually working with them to do a couple things. One is to figure out how to measure that engagement, which is not trivial, right? So traditionally it's been things like time, right? You use a stopwatch and see how long does a kid stay at a given place. And that's actually how engagement is often measured even in academic contexts. How long are they staring at that, page or whatever. But does that really show engagement? Don't think so, right? So we're doing various physiological measures, self-report measures, all these kinds of things to figure out how to measure engagement. But then we're also trying out different learning scenarios. So for instance, we're trying, their two main principles in informal learning settings are, and I think this kind of relates, I hope, somewhat, how much, whether that learning should be all open, free choice. And it's really kind of striking that they really think like almost there should be no signs on the exhibits. It should be all sort of you figure it out, right? So we're testing out that approach versus a much more scaffolded, informed, still a lot of exploration and choice and things, but giving a little bit more information about what the goal of the activity is, how you might engage with it, that kind of thing. So we're testing those two scenarios, those two conditions in terms of both engagement and learning. And then we're also testing out one of the sort of other main principles is that learning is social, which I have less sort of reason to doubt. But so we're testing out what happens when you have individual students versus dyads, pairs. And again, we're going to look at engagement and learning. So partly this is a nice example of engagement does not mean wow and like high excitement and make everything sort of glitzy and fun, and that's not necessarily going to be the best for learning. Here's a case where they've got that and they're still having trouble with learning. So stay tuned, and in another year or so we'll start to have some results that kind of start to shape this this understanding to make it a little bit more nuanced. Any final questions or thoughts? Okay. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to talk with you.